Hi, I'm Erin. I'm the training facilitator at the Pikes Peak Workforce Center. Thank you for joining me today. Today, we're going to talk about 4 things to do before your next interview. So if you're typically a person who you get excited when you get a call for an interview and you're like, yes, I'm one step closer to the job, and then the nerves set in and you start to panic and freak out, we want to talk to you today and give you some pointers that will help you feel more confident in the interview. So let's get started. First, I want you to understand what an interview is. An interview is a two-way street. This is as much about you deciding if this is the right position and the right company for you as it is for them to decide if you're the right fit for them. An interview is not a game. All too often, people go into an interview with a mindset of, I need to figure out what they want me to say and say that. And sometimes that results in them not being authentic with their responses. Well, that creates another problem, because if you're not authentic with what motivates you, what you're capable of, those types of things, you might get the job, but then you might not live up to their expectations. And then you end up, let's say, getting fired or being asked to leave or whatever the case may be. And now you have a whole new problem, because now you have to figure out in future resumes and interviews, how do you answer about why you were with this company for so long? So I want you to be really specific and authentic with your answers, because it is not a game. And an interview is your chance to sell yourself and get the job offer. All right, so the first thing that you want to do before an interview is research. Now, you should have already done some research before you even applied to the job. You should know a little bit about the company, what they do, all of those types of things. But when you get an invite to an interview, now you need to dig deep into the research on that company. So definitely look at what is the company's mission, vision, and values. You might look at their sources of funding. Are they privately owned or publicly owned? Are they government funded? Is it a grant funded position? Those types of things. You also want to look at who are the key players. Maybe there's a board of directors or the management team. You might be able to find some of that, and you want to know more about them. With board of directors, keep in mind that oftentimes those people are not employees of the company. They work other places. So do a little bit of research on them as well. Where do they work? Get to know a little bit more about them. What is the reputation of the company? And you're actually going to look at this from 2 different standpoints. What is the reputation of the company from the consumer standpoint or the customer standpoint? What do people think of them? Great, easy way to do that is just going to be, you can Google them, and you might get some like Yelp reviews or Google reviews, those types of things. Also, you want to look at the reputation from the employee standpoint. What do employees think of them? Glassdoor.com and Indeed both have really great options to look at employee reviews. This is a great place to find out, what do people think of the management? What do people think of the benefits package, the pay, those types of things? And every once in a while, you might get lucky and somebody might put a comment in there about, like, for instance, this company likes to ask the question, what type of animal would you be? And that can help you prepare for the interview. You want to look at, what are their strategies and goals? You also might look at, do they have new contracts or projects or products that they're launching? These are all important things that could come up in the interview. Get to know the types of people they employ. Really great way to do that is go see if they have a LinkedIn company page. And if they do, you can see the employees and you can get a little feel for who do they employ. You might want to know about the compensation and benefits. Now, big bonus right now in Colorado, as of January 1st, is employers have to post their wages when they post jobs in Colorado. So it might be kind of easy now to find the compensation. May not always be easy to find out about the benefits, but again, that's where those employee reviews can come in handy. You want to know definitely about what do they do, right? What are the services that they offer, the products that they have, that type of thing. And what is their career path or opportunities that are available? So you can look at all of this. Obviously, look at their website. That's a great place to find a lot of information. Google or do whatever internet browser search you like. Just search the company's name. You'll learn a lot about them through different articles that might be posted. You might see news press releases, those types of things. Again, you've got the Glassdoor. I also, for the purpose of the customer or consumer reputation, little trick that I like to use a Better Business Bureau site. If this company is listed on the Better Business Bureau site, you can look and you might find out what their pain point is. So let's talk about that for a second. The pain point. When a company is hiring a person, they're not hiring the person because the CEO is walking around with money falling out of their pockets and they're like, oh, I've got too much money, I guess I should just hire somebody else, right? They're hiring somebody because they have a challenge or a pain point. So if you can uncover what that challenge or pain point is during your research, this is information that you can then tailor your responses to your interview questions and speak to their pain point. So if you're researching this company on the Better Business Bureau site, and let's say, for instance, you'll be interviewing for an office manager position, and you see that this company has 10 complaints in the last year, that the technician was late or never showed up on time, you know that scheduling is a pain point for them. And you can work that in to your responses a little bit later. So I'll give you an example of that later. In addition to researching the company, you also want to get to know your interviewers. I suggest when they call to schedule the interview with you that you ask, oh, I'm so excited for this opportunity, and who will I be interviewing with? Now, they might not be able to give you names of people, but even if they can give you one person's name, I want you to research that person. Now, notice I said research, not stalk. There is a very fine line between researching and stalking a person. And in this instance, that fine line is called Google. You don't want to Google the individual. You want to go see if you can find them on LinkedIn. If you can find them on LinkedIn, just look at their profile, get to know a little bit about them. Maybe how long have they been with the company? What has their career path been like at the company? You might see that they started out in a different position and they've moved into various positions in their time there. So look at those types of things. And I just suggest researching the person because I think it helps to put you on a little bit more of a level playing field. One of the things that people feel so uncomfortable about in interviewing is, I don't know these people. I'm walking in, meeting complete strangers. I feel like I'm in an interrogation seat. It feels really uncomfortable. Well, if you get to see who the interviewers are and get to know them a little bit, it's kind of like you already know these people just a little bit. All right. In addition to getting to know them, you might notice when you first walk into the room or when you first are called back for the interview, you might create a perception or a first impression of your interviewers. And it's important, especially if that perception is negative, that you gain control over that, because that can affect your perception of your interviewers, can affect how you respond, whether it's through the words that come out of your mouth or whether it's how you respond with your body language. It can be affected with your perception or first impression of your interviewers. So let's just say, for instance, that you have an interview scheduled at 10 a.m. You get there about 9:45 and you wait. 10 o'clock comes and goes, you're still waiting. 10:15 comes and goes, you're still waiting. Finally, around like 10:35, somebody comes out and they say, follow me. And they just turn their back towards you and start walking. You're going to probably catch in your head that you have some self-talk going on at that point. You might be thinking things like, that was rude. They didn't even introduce themselves. They didn't even apologize for being late. I don't think I want to work here. They don't value my time. These are all things that are likely to be going through your head as you're walking back to the interview. And those types of things can affect how you respond. So now you might get into the interview and they say, well, tell me about yourself. And because you have a negative first impression of them, you might come across a little passive aggressive or sarcastic or maybe even a little defensive. Well, I'm always on time. That would be super passive aggressive, right? So you want to gain control over those perceptions that you have of the interviewers. Now, a handout that you'll have access to is the 10 types of interviewers. Yes, if you have a panel interview where let's say you have 5 different people interviewing you for this position, those interviewers might have different interview styles or personalities that might show. So let's say, for instance, you get the best friend interviewer. The best friend interviewer, they're usually way too enthusiastic about everything. Their handshake is super enthusiastic. They might talk about personal stuff, and everything you say is they're like eating it up. They're like, right? And you're like, whoa, what is going on here? Now, the problem with the best friend interviewer is that it tends to make you want to let your guard down. And it's okay to let your guard down just a smidge, but you don't want to forget the fact that you're interviewing for a job. You're not interviewing for a best friend. So you still want to make sure that you stay on top of this is an interview. You might, for example, get the interrogator. The interrogator rapid fires questions at you. There is no room for conversation outside of you answering those questions. And a lot of people will take that personally. They'll think, oh man, I'm really bombing this. I can't believe that this is going so poorly. And you have to just understand with an interrogator, your job is just answer the questions and then stop talking. There's no need to try to engage them in any kind of conversation outside of their interview questions. So there are 8 more. I just covered 2. So at some point, go through those 10 types of interviewers and get to know them and how to deal with each type of interviewer, okay? And chances are, yes, if you have a panel of 5 people interviewing you, they're all gonna have a little bit of a different type of interview style or personality. And so it's definitely helpful to know all of those styles and be prepared so you can identify them when you walk in the room and start to get to know them a little bit. All right, so 47% of bosses say that one of the biggest mistakes that people make in interviews is having little or no knowledge of the company. So you can see where researching the company ahead of time is key to your success in your interviews. Most first interviews will consist of about 15 to 20 questions. These questions are generally written ahead of time. This is a way to ensure that each candidate is asked the same questions to make sure no one candidate gets an advantage over the others, and also to make sure that they cover themselves so that there's no claim that there was an illegal question asked or anything along those lines. Generally speaking, you want to keep your responses to interview questions from about 90 seconds to 2 minutes long. Some of these questions you might be able to answer more quickly than 90 seconds. And that's okay. That gives you extra time in the bank for some questions that might take a little bit longer. So I'm going to give you guys an exercise that will help you to prepare your responses to some of these frequently asked questions. And the exercise is conditioned to help you really come across more naturally and confidently during the interview. So I suggest you buy 3x5 index cards. And you only get 1 card per question and 1 question per card. So on the top line, you're going to write whatever the question happens to be. Tell me about yourself, or what are your greatest strengths, whatever the case may be. On the lines below that, you're going to write talking points. This is important. I do not want you to try to write a script, what you want to say. When you write a script, a couple of things happen. The first thing is, if you happen to be good enough to memorize that script, you're going to come across very unnaturally, very much like a computer, like a robot, and you don't want that to happen. So the other thing that happens with that is, as adults, we don't tend to memorize things quite so well. We're out of the habit of doing that. And if you've ever watched a kid's play where they had lines and the kid forgot the line, they don't move on, they freeze. Right? Until the teacher's over there whispering in the corner what the line is. So you want to make sure that when you write these talking points, it conditions in flexibility, which allows you, if you forget one point, to move on to the next point. Start with about 10 to 15 of these cards. And as I mentioned, you only get 1 card per question. If you fill up 2 cards with your response, it means you're talking too much on that question. So keep it concise and direct. So once you've written out these 10 to 15 cards, punch a hole in the upper left-hand corner, put something through it, whether it's one of those locking rings, tie a piece of yarn through it, a rubber band, something along those lines. And these are now your flashcards. You're going to take these flashcards with you everywhere. So when you go to Walmart on Friday night, military pay week, and for some reason, again, there's only 2 cashiers available, so you're waiting in line, rather than looking at the magazines or commiserating with the people in line with you, pull out these flashcards. When you go to the doctor's office for an oil change, whatever the case may be, instead of picking up that magazine, look at your flashcards. What I want you to do is get to the point where when you look at the question, your talking points come to mind. And again, they don't necessarily have to be in order. It's about the flexibility. So your talking points come to mind when you look at those questions. Now, hopefully, by the time that you've got those 10 to 15 questions down, hopefully you've had some successful interviews and gotten a job offer. But if you haven't, if you've gotten all 10 to 15 of those questions down, add 5 more cards. So you'll also have access to a handout that's going to help you with those questions. It's about potential interview questions that you might run into. So let's talk about some of those frequently asked interview questions. The first, tell me about yourself. I can't tell you how many times people tell me this is their least favorite question, and it's generally the first question that's asked. Imagine starting off feeling like that. So I want you to feel really confident with this tell me about yourself question. Now, tell me about yourself does not mean you launch into information about your family, your friends, your hobbies, what you like to do outside of work, any of those types of things. You want to make sure that it's still relevant to the job. So you want to talk about, for example, how your experience, your education, and your goals, what you want to achieve, how those are in line with this position. Now, sometimes they might throw a little bit of a curveball, and they might say something along the lines of, tell me something about yourself that I can't find in your resume. Now, that's a little bit different because obviously your experience and your education is in your resume. So if they ask you the curveball question, tell me something I can't find about, tell me something about yourself that I can't find in your resume. Now, this is a great chance to maybe talk about some of those things, for example, that you left out of your resume. Maybe, for example, we talk about toning down your resume. So maybe you left your master's degree off of your resume. Now this might be a chance to talk about that. Or it might just even be a little bit about why you love this type of work, right? I know for me, for example, I love public speaking. It's a very weird thing. And so that's something they're not going to find in my resume. They're not going to see that I love public speaking. I'm not going to write about that in my resume, but this is a chance for me to talk about that. All right, another frequently asked question. What are your greatest strengths? Generally speaking, when you answer about the strengths, you're going to give them 3 strengths. And these 3 strengths should still be relevant to the position you're applying to, but you don't want to just name the 3 strengths. My strengths are attention to detail, organization, and communication. You want to make sure you give a little bit of an anecdote for each one of those about how that skill or how that strength has been handy for you in positions in the past. So my communication skills have allowed me to be a great training facilitator, something along those lines. You give a little anecdote about that, all right? Now, keep in mind that you might not always know your strengths. I think this is really important. Up until I was about 30 years old, I used to give 3 strengths that I think made it sound like I was interviewing for a playground attendant position. Like I have a great sense of humor, I'm easygoing, I get along well with others. Well, I had just bombed an internal interview for a promotion in the correctional field. Just imagine, I'm saying I get along well with others, I have a great sense of humor. They don't want that. So feel free, if you don't know what your strengths are, to do what I did. I went to one of my supervisors, I said, hey Casey, what are my greatest strengths? What are my strengths? And he said, those things that I told you earlier, attention to detail, communication, and organization. And I was like, what? I never knew. I live with these things on a day-to-day basis, so I don't necessarily recognize that they're strengths, but I didn't know that my coworkers did. So feel free to ask people that you've worked with or worked for, what did you appreciate about working with me, or what do you think are my greatest strengths? All right, then on the flip side, we have what are your greatest weaknesses? So let's talk about first what you're not going to say. First, you never want to say, I don't have any weaknesses, I'm pretty perfect, right? Employers ask about your weaknesses because they want to know that you understand your weaknesses. It's very much like any type of addiction. If you don't know that you have a problem, you can't fix it. It's the same thing with your weakness. If you don't recognize that it's a weakness, you can't do anything to remediate that. So you want to be aware of it. Another thing, you don't want to give a silly answer like, my greatest weakness is chocolate. Don't do that. Don't give a weakness that's a personal characteristic that's going to be a negative reflection on you. Like, well, I'm just not a morning person. Awesome, this job starts at 8 a.m. That's not going to be a great fit for you. Also, don't give a response that's cliche. So a lot of people will give the response like, I'm a perfectionist, I work too hard. Those are cliche. Employers are used to hearing that. And finally, you don't want to give a response that's critical to the position. So for example, imagine when I was interviewing for the training position, if they would have said, Erin, what's your greatest weakness? And I would have said public speaking. that would be a problem because public speaking is critical to what I do. So now let's start talking about what do you want to say with these weaknesses. I usually give two different types of examples. The first is if it is a personal characteristic, and I'm actually going to use a good friend of mine named Tony for this example because she was just getting her out of the correctional industry, and I don't mean like she was in corrections, but she had been working in the correctional industry for about 20 years, and she was looking to get out. And she was getting ready for an interview, and she said, I don't know what my weakness is. And I said, oh, I do. And I think she was a little bit offended by that. She said, oh, really? And I said, yes. And I said, I don't know if you remember this, but when we first met each other and were working together, I didn't think you liked me. And she was like, you didn't? And I said, no, you didn't talk to me for about 9 months. And when you did start talking to me, I said, oh, wow, you like me? And so she's a very introverted person, first of all, very shy and kind of, it takes a while for her to warm up. But also because she's worked in that industry for 20 years, she's kind of got a wall up, right? So that's the weakness that I shared with her. And she was like, okay, but what do I do with that? Well, she had just completed her master's degree program. And so in her master's degree program, she actually joined, for every single class she took, she actually joined study groups. And that forced her to meet with other students and get to know them. And she had to warm up much more quickly if they all wanted to be successful in the class. So I coached her to say something along the lines of, you know, I've become aware that I'm very introverted and shy, and it takes me a while to warm up to people. And I am now aware that sometimes people think that means I'm not very friendly, and I don't want people to think that. So in my master's degree program, I joined study groups for each of my classes, and I was forced out of my comfort zone to meet new people and to connect with them much more quickly. So that could be an example of a personal characteristic. Now on the flip side, let's say it is a technical skill that you're using. Again, it cannot be a critical skill to the job, but it could be a technical skill nonetheless. So let's say, for instance, that this position is looking for, it says preferred experience with some type of software program. And maybe you don't have experience with that specific software program. So it's not a requirement, it's just a preference on their job posting. So you could use this as a weakness. I don't have specific work experience with, let's just say, Peachtree, which is an accounting software. But what I've done is I've gone and I've looked at some YouTube videos about Peachtree and learned about some of the features. I did a free course on Coursera, for example, about Peachtree. So I'm showing that, yes, I don't have the specific work experience, but I've done some at least research on it. I at least know a little bit about it. All right. So I know a lot of people, you might hear you turn your weakness into a strength. It's not necessarily that. Your weakness is probably never going to be your strength, but you need to show that you've worked on it. All right. Next, let's talk about, why are you leaving? Why did you leave your last position? Why are you leaving your current position? Whatever the situation might be for you. So first, let me just say that if, for example, you're laid off through no fault of your own, your company was closing, your company was downsizing, shifting their operations overseas, whatever the case may be, there is nothing wrong with saying that, as long as you can say so without an emotional attachment. If you sound mad, if you sound sad about it, that's going to be a problem. If you left your last position or are leaving the position because, let's just say, it's not a good fit, the position isn't a good fit for you, you didn't get along with your manager or something along those lines, you don't want to ever speak negatively about the company, the position, your coworkers, anything like that. So we're going to flip that. And what we're going to actually do is we're going to talk about not what did I not get from this position, but what am I looking for in my next position. So let's say in my last position, it just became one of those things where I could do the job in my sleep. It was so easy. There was no challenge for me anymore. I wanted to promote within the last company, but there was no opportunity for that. I'm not necessarily going to say that because that could sound like I'm upset about it. But I might say I'm really looking for a position or a company where there's an opportunity for me to be challenged and to stretch outside of my comfort zone. right? I think that that's an amazing response to give. And it helps to, again, kind of reframe the question. So if they ask about why you're leaving or why you've left your last position, just make sure to stay positive. Make sure you have no negative emotions even in the way you're talking about that. Next, let's talk about those goals questions. So these usually sound like, where do you see yourself in 5 years, or where do you see yourself in 10 years, or what have you? So you want to give a specific example that's relevant to the job you're applying to. That's the first thing I want you to focus on, is stay focused on the actual job that you're interviewing for. So let's say, for instance, I'm interviewing for a position as a customer service rep at USAA. And I've been in customer service and call centers before, for example, but it's not been with insurance. So I might say something along the lines of, well, in the first year, my goal is to learn as much about the insurance industry so that I can serve USAA customers the best possible way. And within those 5 years, I'd like to be among the top 10% of customer service reps nationwide. I've set a very specific goal. Employers don't want somebody who's just going to come fill a seat. They want somebody who's going to come help them achieve their goals. And so when you're talking about your goals, it needs to fit in with what their goals are likely to be. Now, you don't want to give a response that makes it sound like there is an expectation that you will promote into a position. So if you just say, well, yeah, I'd like to learn as much about customer service, and then hopefully in 5 years, or in 5 years, I want to be in management. That sounds like an expectation. But if you are looking for that upward mobility within the company, there's a way to phrase this so that it doesn't sound like an expectation, and it shows your enthusiasm for new challenges. So I might say, again, the same type of thing as far as, in the first year, I want to learn as much about the insurance industry and how I can serve your USAA customers the best possible way. In 5 years, I'd like to be, among the top 10% of customer service reps nationwide. And if the opportunity should present itself for me to, let's say, get back into management, or for me to get into a supervisory position, I've had the opportunity to have some amazing supervisors. I've learned really great things for them. And I'd really love to create a team and help build a team just like they built me. So notice how I phrased that in a way that it sounds like it's not an expectation. It's, should the opportunity present itself? All right. So now you might also get that question, why should we hire you? Now, you don't know the competition, and it would be a really bad idea, even if you did know the competition, to badmouth them in any type of way. So you need to understand, when they're asking, why should we hire you? The question is really, why are you different than the other people? Why are you different than other customer service reps? Why are you different than other trainers? Whatever position. So what makes you different? This might be your philosophy in dealing with certain types of tasks on the job. So let's again use the example of customer service. Well, we know customer service is not a glamorous job. Most of the times when you get calls from people as a customer service rep, it's usually not because they're super happy, right? So you'll probably have dealt with some difficult customers. And so if they're saying, why should we hire you? Maybe I have a different philosophy on how I treat customers that are upset. So I might share that. Having been on the receiving end of poor customer service before, I, as a customer service representative, have really defined myself by putting myself in the shoes of the person who's on the phone with me and helping to really listen to their situation so that I can give them the best possible outcome. So this is a chance to brag about yourself. What makes you different? Now, you might have actually learned some of this when you were creating your accomplishment statements for resumes, because maybe you learned that you're actually really good at creating revenue. So you might talk about that. That might be why they should hire you. I've created more revenue in my company than the 3 people before me, or whatever the case may be. This is a chance to brag about yourself. Now, on the flip side, when they say, why should we hire you? They might say, why do you want to work for us? And let me tell you, the answer is not because you guys have a job. It's not because I heard you guys pay well. But when you are really researching this company, you should really be trying to learn things about this company that draw you to them, That might be something about their mission and vision. Maybe their mission and vision is aligned with your personal mission and vision. Or maybe it's a specific project that they're working on and you have like the exact experience working on that project before. But why do you want to work for us? So find something as you're researching. You really want to uncover stuff about that company. And again, can't be about the pay or benefits. So let's say, for instance, as I'm researching, I've learned that the company gives their employees 2 paid days off per year to go volunteer in the community. So that might be part of why I want to work for them. But this is a great chance to share your PIE, your passion, interest, enthusiasm. That acronym is going to come up a couple of times. So share your PIE, your passion, interest, and enthusiasm. This is a chance for you to court or woo a company. So I want you to imagine, let's say that, somebody asks you out on a date and they say, hey, do you want to go to dinner on Friday night? Now, this is a suggestion. You should be like, oh, that's so sweet. Why do you want to take me on a date? Imagine if they actually said, you look like you need one. I'm asking everyone I see. That's not courting or wooing, right? That's not going to make you inclined. Now, I would go for free food, but that's not going to make you inclined to really want to go on a date with this person and get to know them more. But if they said, your energy, when you come in the room, your energy just lights up the room, and I'm really drawn to that. That's courting or wooing. So it's the same thing that you're going to do with the company. You're going to court or woo them based on what you've learned about them in your research. All right, let's talk about behavioral questions. These are usually the most difficult and the ones that people dislike the very most. Behavioral questions usually start like this. Tell me about a time when, or give me an example of. So when they ask this, they're not asking for your overarching theory of how you would handle a situation. They're saying, tell me about a time when. In other words, tell them a story about a specific concrete time that this happened. And I'll talk a little bit about what if I've never had that happen. So let's look at an example of how you're going to formulate that response. You're going to use the STAR formula. If you've watched the resume webinars, you've heard the STAR formula before. What was the situation? What was the task at hand? What was the action that you took? And what was the result or outcome? So let's go with, tell me about a time you had a conflict with a coworker. The situation, and you're not going to actually go situation task. You're not going to say that. A coworker and I were put to work together on a project, and we had differing ideas on how this project should be managed. That's the situation, okay? We were launching a new product, and we wanted our social media campaign to bring in $1 million worth of sales in the first year. That would be an example of the task. The action. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys 2 different examples with the same situation and task, because I want to show you if you handled the situation correctly and if you didn't handle the situation correctly, how you can still use that. So the action. My coworker was called away for emergency family leave. My boss came to me and asked for the project, and I just wanted to hurry up and get something to my boss, so I gave them my project. And yes, while we did launch and have $1 million worth of sales in the first month, when my coworker came back, she was very upset that I didn't include any of her ideas, and it made it very difficult for us to work together on projects in the future. Okay, so notice that was I didn't handle the situation correctly. If you are using an example where you did not handle it the best you could have, it is very important that you follow up with what I've learned to do since then. What I've learned to do since then is to do this, and I don't want to give you the answer because I'm going to use that for the positive. All right, so let's now go with the positive. Same situation, same task. That we'll start with the action. My coworker was called away for emergency family leave. My boss came to me and asked for the project. I wanted to make sure that I included some of my coworkers' ideas, so I brought in a third person and asked them to help me put together something that would incorporate both of our ideas. We launched the product successfully. We had $1 million worth of sales through our social media campaign. And when my coworker came back, she was so excited that I did include some of her ideas, and we were able to successfully work on projects together in the future. So notice sometimes we don't always handle situations that well, and we learn that there are different ways to do that. So let's say, for instance, you're in customer service. you can almost guarantee you're going to get the question, tell me about a time you had to deal with a difficult customer. Again, don't give this overarching, oh yeah, I've dealt with lots of difficult customers. You need to give them a specific example. If you're in a position where you supervise people, you might be asked a question along those lines. So tell me about a time you had to counsel one of your employees about not meeting performance goals. If you're in a position where there will be lots of timelines, it's very normal to assume you will be asked about, tell me about a time you were under a tight deadline and you knew that you weren't going to meet that deadline. So in the handout with the potential interview questions, there's a lot of behavioral questions in there, and they cover different dimensions like time management, like supervisory, those types of things. So definitely focus a lot of your attention on those behavioral questions, because again, these are often the most difficult to answer. When you're already feeling like you're in the interrogation seat and you're already so nervous, it's so easy for your brain to just blank out. And so this is a good time to start thinking of those responses. I will usually suggest to people, yes, for those 15 cards, let's say for instance that you start with, I might do 5 with some of those common strengths, weaknesses, tell me about yourself, goals, that type of thing. I'm going to focus the majority of those cards on those behavioral types of questions. What if you've actually never had this happen? So the first thing I'll tell you is you might need to look at your definition of things. Because let's say the question is, tell me about a time you had a conflict with a coworker. And, in your mind, you've never had a conflict with a coworker. Because in your mind, conflict truly means like you're taking off earrings and going out to the back parking lot, right? So you're like, I've never had that. For other people, conflict might mean like their coworker looked at them and said, no. And they're like, ah. So you have to sometimes look at your definition. Conflict doesn't necessarily mean it's on an extreme. It could just mean a disagreement. But maybe I still have never had a situation like that. So you can also draw for your responses from things like maybe your education. Maybe I didn't have a conflict with a coworker, but maybe when I was working on a group project for a class that I was in, we had some conflict. You can draw from your volunteerism. So let's say while you're volunteering, there's, whatever situation comes up, you're under a deadline and you're not going to make it. So you can pull from other examples, just not from home. So if they say, tell me about a time you had a conflict with your coworker, and you go, yeah, I've never had a conflict with my coworker, but let me tell you about all the conflict with my spouse, right? You don't get to do that. Now, I do suggest that if, let's say, you have truly never had this experience, you don't want to make something up, but let's say out of 5 behavioral questions you might get in a first interview, there's one and you're like, I've never really had that happen. Don't just say I've never had that happen. I want you to say something along the lines of, I've really put some thought into this question beforehand, and I can honestly say that in looking through my work experience and looking through my education, my volunteerism, I can't think of a time when this has happened. Would you like to hear of how I would handle the situation based on my conflict resolution skills or something along those lines? But you can only do that for one, and if at all possible, don't do it for any. But if you answer another question, if they ask you another behavioral question and you go, yeah, I've really thought about that and it's never happened, they're now going to assume you're lying or hiding something. So you can only use that once if you really have to. All right. Those are the behavioral questions. Let's talk about some of the really crazy questions you might get asked. So sometimes I'll ask a brain teaser, or sometimes I look at it as the pressure cooker type of question. So they really don't expect you to know the answer. They're seeing how you handle it under pressure. So for example, how many dogs are there in the United States? They're looking to see, are you going to lie, first of all? Well, last time I checked, which was yesterday, it was 2,365,901. Or are you going to admit that you don't know? So of course, the correct answer is you admit that you don't know, but you can't stop there. So I might say something like, I don't know the answer to that, but if you really needed to know the answer, what I would do is I would go to the ASPCA website, I would look at the number of registered dogs nationwide, and I would add a 10% increase to account for the dogs that may not be registered. So part of this brain teaser or pressure cooker type of question is truly about how do you problem solve? How are you going to find that information if you don't know? There's also the questions that they might ask where there's truly no right or wrong answer. What type of animal would you be? They're not waiting for the person that says Puma and whoever says Puma gets hired, right? They're not waiting for that. It's how you answer it. So I was teaching this course to a group of transitioning veterans, and I asked this question. Tell me, what type of animal would you be? And this young guy, and I get to call him a kid because he was in his 20s. So this young kid, he looks so proud of himself, and he goes, I'd be a German Shepherd. He was so proud of himself. And I said, okay, awesome. What if I've been attacked by a dog before and I'm terrified of dogs? Or what if all I know of German Shepherds is they are trained military and police attack dogs? And he said, oh no, German Shepherds are very smart and easy to train and very loyal dogs. And I said, aha, that's where the answer is. It's in the traits that you identify with that. And I've heard lots of crazy questions like this. Somebody told me they were asked if you were any kind of cereal, what kind of cereal would it be? And I was like, wow, that's a crazy one. If you could have any superpower, what superpower would you have? I will say there is one kind of wrong answer on this, depending. So never say like X-ray vision would be your superpower. Unless you're actually in the medical field or the security field, X-ray vision would be a great superpower to have. But for any normal person, X-ray vision might sound a little off there. All right. So you might get some of those types of questions as well. And remember, I said sometimes when you're on Glassdoor, for example, somebody might actually put in their company review that they might like to ask these types of weird questions that then you can prepare for ahead of time. All right. So, illegal questions. Employers are not allowed to ask questions about these types of things. Your race, your religion, your family status, like do you have kids? Are you planning to have kids? They shouldn't ask these questions. They're illegal. But if you are asked the question, I want you to know how to handle it. So I actually had a young lady in my workshop years ago. She was a military spouse. And she shared with me when I was talking about illegal interview questions, she said, I've been on a lot of interviews, and I actually had a gentleman ask me recently if I was planning to have kids because as a military spouse, he just assumed I was going to have kids. And I said, wow. And I said, how did you answer that? And she said, I just kind of looked at him blank, and I don't want you to do that. So if you're asked an illegal interview question, I think the best way to handle it is to say something along the lines of, I'd really rather stay focused on how I'm qualified and a good fit for this job than my personal life. But sometimes when they ask an illegal question, they're getting at something deeper. So they might not necessarily ask you direct out, like what your age is, but you feel like it's a question because of your age, for example. So you could say, I'd rather stay focused on how I'm qualified for this job, or because you're identifying that this might be about my age, you could actually say, you know, I've learned in working with 3 different generations on a team, I've learned that having a team with a lot of diversity in the generations is actually extremely helpful because everybody brings their strengths to the table. I've addressed the fact that they might be concerned about my age, and I've turned that into a positive. Next, let's talk about the third thing you want to do, which is to prepare some interview questions to ask them. At the end of an interview, most of the times they will say, do you have any questions for us? And you don't want to say no, because if you say no, it's like saying, I'm not that interested. So you want to have these questions prepared ahead of time. Now, when you're asking these questions, the first thing that it does is it demonstrates your interest. But you can also ask these questions that are going to help you gain more information to help you leverage yourself as the best candidate, whether right then and there on the spot or in your follow-up or in a second interview or something along those lines. So let's talk about some of the questions. And I usually suggest you have 3 to 5 interview questions prepared beforehand. I'm a safety girl, so I err on the side of caution and go with 5. You might ask a question that would help you to connect with the interviewer themselves. And I'm not a big fan of connecting by saying, what do you like about working here? Because number one, most of us, as we've been in our careers, we have probably experienced how we have the love and hate or the ebb and flow of our relationships, where it's like of our job, where it's like, I love my job, I hate my job, and you might catch them on a hate their job type of day. So I'm not a big fan of asking that, but I do love the question, something along the lines of, what's one of the most interesting projects that you've had the opportunity to work on while you've been here? Okay, that's a great way to connect with the interviewer. I'll give you a little tip. Then you're kind of flipping the table on them and making them answer a question a little bit more deeply and look into themselves. And so you get to have a little fun there. You might ask some questions that are going to help you get to know more about the company or position. So you might say something along the lines of, what qualities would make a person in this position successful? Now, let's say, for instance, their response is, we really need someone with great time management skills. And you didn't happen to mention your time management skills and your strengths. Well, if your brain thinks quickly enough, right then and there on the spot, you get a chance to have a rebuttal. So you can say something like, let me tell you about a time when I was managing a project and my time management skills helped us finish the project early. And I'd go into a little bit more detail. But what if your brain doesn't think quickly enough? It's okay. That information you're going to jot down. So you're going to have the question written down already. What qualities would make a person in this position successful? And then you can actually just jot down time management. And then later, when you think about it and your brain comes back to life, you can use this in your follow-up or in a second interview to leverage yourself as a strong candidate. You can try to learn more about the company's or department's goals. They asked you about your goals. Why not ask them about theirs? What are the goals for this position or this department, for example, and how does this position help to achieve those goals? I do suggest asking a question about training, specifically if you're brand new into this occupation. If you don't have experience, I highly suggest asking a question about what the training looks like. So I might say, what's your training plan for me in the first 6 months on the job? Now you guys might notice I didn't say, what's your training plan for the person you hire? I said, for me. And a lot of people go, ooh, that's presumptuous. And I go, I'm okay with that. I like presumptuous. But if they come back and they say, well, yeah, pretty much our training is about 1 week long. We have you shadow a couple of different people and then we throw you out to the wolves. And of course, they won't say it like that. But that doesn't sound like a very thorough training plan. And if I've never done this type of work before, they're setting me up for failure. But if they say, our training is about a month long, it's a mix of in-classroom training as well as on-the-floor training. You're going to shadow several other people so you get to see the different styles. And then before we put you out there working on your own, we're going to have some people shadow you as well. That makes me feel like they're setting me up for success. And then finally, wrap-up questions. And you probably know some of the wrap-up questions, but one that most people don't know, and this is my favorite question to ask at the end, do you have any remaining hesitations or concerns about hiring me? And some of you might go, oh, ooh, I don't know about that, Erin. Well, you only ask this question if you are ready to answer. So most of us know if there's an elephant in the room is what I call it. So in other words, if I know I'm overqualified for this position, that's the elephant in the room. If I know I have a criminal background of some sort, that's the elephant in the room. So I'm only going to ask this question if I'm prepared to respond to what I think is likely to be their answer. True story, I was sitting on an interview panel, and before we called, it was phone interviews, and before we called the candidate, the supervisor of the position said, I'm concerned about this candidate because she's only been on her current job for about 4 months, and I'm wondering why she's looking to leave this position so quickly. We got the candidate on the phone. We went through the whole interview. My boss never asked about it. And at the end, because this candidate had sat through my workshops before, she asked this question. Do you have any remaining hesitations or concerns about hiring me? And since she invited that question, the supervisor came back and said, yes, I'm actually kind of concerned because I see you've only been with your current employer for 4 months. And I'm wondering why you're looking to leave so quickly. She said, well, this is a grant-funded position that actually ends in 2 months, so I'm just trying to get ahead of things. And that quenched all of those concerns that the supervisor had about her longevity with her current employer. So I think that's a genius question to ask. Anyway, whatever questions you ask, make sure you have them written down beforehand. Don't rely on your brain to remember what questions you want to ask, but really understand that you're trying to get to the point where you are getting more information that you can use to your benefit in the future. Now, I mentioned earlier when I talked about doing the research that you might, for example, learn that this company has 10 complaints about their technicians being late or never on time. So it tells you that their pain point or challenge is time management, scheduling, that type of thing. Now, you might be actually able to work in some of that. So I might talk about time management then after I've learned that as one of my strengths. Or I might talk about, for example, within the customer service question, I might throw in, I think one of the best things that we can do to provide great customer service is to make sure that we're not wasting our customers' time. And so it's very critical that our technicians are on time to the appointments. I can talk about it in that sense. If it doesn't happen to come up, that I can't find a way to work it into any of the questions that they've asked, they might say something like, do you have any remaining questions for us, or is there anything else you'd like us to know? And I might just say, in looking at this position as an office manager, I see that there's a lot of different kind of roles that I'm filling. I need to make sure that my staff have everything they need. I need to make sure that the customers have everything they need. And I think one of the biggest things that's important from the customer standpoint is to make sure that their time is respected. And then I can launch into that more detailed explanation of, let's say, for example, how I helped with my previous company. I helped research and deploy a new time management or scheduling software, and that helped us increase our on-time efficiency, for example. All right, so while there are questions you should definitely look at asking during the interview, there are also questions you don't want to ask. Don't ask questions about salary. And again, keep in mind, now we have a little bit of an advantage by them having to post the salary. You don't want to ask questions specifically about promotions or benefits or working from home. Now, I understand that sometimes they might actually give you this type of information throughout the interview. They might say, this is, our policy, you'll work from home this many days, you'll work in the office or what have you. Just don't be the person to ask those types of questions. Let's talk a little bit more about the salary thing. If you ask too much about money, all it shows the employer is, I'm here for me. What can you do for me? And in this interview, you need to show them that you're the best candidate, because then they might be more willing to leverage things like maybe, they'll give you 5% more than what the bottom range of that position was. But you have to leverage yourself as the best candidate first. So don't ask questions about salary. But what if they ask you questions about salary? So, Erin, what is your desired salary for this position? Now, your first response is going to be what I call a political response. So you're not actually going to answer the question directly. So I'll give you two examples of a political response to this question. You might say something along the lines of, I've researched the salaries for training specialist positions in the Colorado Springs area. I'm perfectly comfortable with the range of salaries that's standard for this position, and I'm sure your human resources department or budget are working within those ranges. Or let's again say that you've actually looked at their job posting and it shows the range. Then you can say, I've seen your range based on your job posting and I'm perfectly comfortable with that range. The second option would be to say something along the lines of, I would really like to know more about the position responsibilities and requirements before I feel comfortable discussing a compensation package. Now, either one of these types of answers basically puts the money on the back burner, and it first says, let's figure out if we're a good fit for each other. So if the question happens to come around a second time, you don't get to give another political response. Now you actually have to give them a direct response. And in an interview, you're always going to talk in terms of a range. So I'd never give one number and say, I'm looking for $40,000 a year. I'd always want to give a range. I'm looking for $40,000 to $45,000 per year, for example. And that range might be based on their actual job posting, or it might be based on the research that you've done and you've found out this is the range for this occupation in this area. Now, keep in mind, even if you come in with experience, I think altogether in my life, I probably have about 10 years of training experience at this point, and I would still never come in and go higher in their range, because I haven't proven anything to them yet. I'm not a superhero to them yet. I have to get on the job and prove that. So while I have that experience, I'm not necessarily going to go at the very low end of their range. I might go somewhere like 7 to 10% above what their low range is to start. So I might say, for example, I'm looking for 40 to 45 when, let's say, for instance, their starting range was like around 37. So the last thing, the fourth thing that you can do before an interview is to practice. You can reach out to your local workforce center to see if they are offering mock interviews and sign up for one of those if they are. Because it's one thing to flip through those flashcards in your mind. Now you need to practice saying it out loud. Now you need to practice saying it to another person. So you need to practice with others. If you are practicing with a friend or family member, once they've said they'll ask you some of these questions, it's critical that you then give them permission to be honest with their feedback, because we all know that there are certain friends and family members that are just going to want to make you feel good. So they're just going to say, oh, that was great, I'd hire you in a heartbeat. That's not helpful if there were things that you could improve upon. So I always tell people, if you have a friend or family member that gives you their honest opinion without you even asking or giving them permission, that's probably the person you want to practice with. And anytime you're practicing, you want to take in the feedback, but still understand that just because somebody said, oh, I would have answered it this way, doesn't mean you have to answer it that way. You're just taking in the feedback and looking at that. And should I change anything about the way I do that? When you're practicing, you want this to be as much like an interview as possible. So you want to be, either maybe you want to practice virtually or maybe in person with them. You want to have in front of you the same things that you would have in front of you for an interview. You want to practice your eye contact and all of those same types of things. So practice, practice, practice. I don't say practice makes perfect. Practice makes you more confident. And you have to understand that the first person that you have to convince that you're the person for this job is you. Then you can convince others. All right, so I hope you join for our next webinar, What to Do During Your Next Interview. Thank you for spending time with me today. Have a great one.